All right. Good morning. My name is Andrew Rope, and I'm a member of the Education Committee. I'm pleased to welcome you to PTs Working in the Federal Government, What Regulators Should Know. This session will answer the age-old question, what do state licensing boards need to know about physical therapists working within the federal system? The presenters will explore the practice of physical therapists across various federal environments, including the U.S. Public Health Service, the Veterans Administration, and tribal governments. The speakers for this session are Jerome Anderson and Jeffrey Richardson. Jerome Anderson operates and coordinates the Office of Officer Advocacy and Employee Relations for the U.S. Public Health Service Commissioned Corps. Jeffrey Richardson is the immediate past Chief Professional Officer for the therapist category of the U.S. Public Health Service. You can find their bios on the event app. They have valuable information to share, and we always encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A portion, the members of the Education Committee will provide you with a microphone. Please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so more attendees have a chance to ask questions. At the end of the session, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation. We really value your feedback. Now I turn the presentation over to our speakers.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm super tall, and standing up here just makes me feel like I'm towering over, like it's, so I'm going to come down as okay, and I like to move around and all that good stuff. So I'm Commander Jerome Anderson, and Captain is going to introduce himself as well, but a couple housekeeping things. We always have to do our speakers' disclosures, so there's really nothing to disclose here. There's no payment or fees or anything that will come to us. We are not necessarily representing anything very specific besides what we do in our profession. Obviously, we're in a uniform, so we do represent the United States Public Health Commission Corps, Public Health Service Commission Corps, but you want to make sure that the things that we discuss are going to be more general as we talk about them, but as you have questions and things of that nature, we definitely can get specific. Things that we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about conditions of service for Commissioned Corps officers when you work in certain federal spaces. It's important to understand that we do have officers that work in the federal space as well as regular federal employees. There are nuances and differences, so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about federal rule and state rule, and then types of discipline. So that part gets a little scary when we talk about that. It's important for us to discuss those things because there's a lot that happens at the federal level before it gets to the state level, or if it ever gets to the state level. So we're going to talk about those things. So let's kind of jump straight in. Who am I? What do I do? Why am I here? So like I said, I'm Commander Jerome Anderson. I run what's called Officer Advocacy and Employee Relations for my entire service. So I'm the guy that hears all of the issues. I'm the guy that puts out all the fires or tries to put out all the fires. I'm the guy that the Corps brings when folks are on fire, issues are happening in real time. I'm the guy that they call and my team. And I do this for our entire service. I advise up the chain of command and I advise down the chain of command. So at any given time, literally this morning, I was texting with the Deputy Surgeon General of the United States, just to give you perspective of where I sit and what I do. I advise the Surgeon General of the United States. I advise the ASH, the Assistant Secretary of Health, as well as our director of our service. And these are all our, what we call flag level officers. So you would, in all the other services, you would know us as admirals or generals. Those are the people that I advise up on what to do with our officer situations. And then I also go all the way down to our field level. So where our officers do the work in all of our federal agencies, I'm also guiding them and advising them. We're trying to get way more proactive, where we educate and help our officers know what to do, what not to do, things of that nature. So I spend a lot of time presenting and trying to help our agencies and our officers know what to do. We're going to talk more about what PHS is, and you'll get a perspective while yes, we're here talking about PT, our service covers all of healthcare. So I end up dealing with all of our medical professionals. And we have non-medical professionals as well, but everyone that's in the healthcare space that could be a physician, a veterinarian, a mental health provider, PT, OT, speech, nurses, dentists, all of our medical folks that we have that are dispatched all across the country. My office is the one that deals with all of those issues, to include regulation, licensure issues, certification issues. So that's a little bit about me. You'll find out way more, and I'll turn it over to Captain.
I feel more comfortable standing up behind the stand. I don't know if I'm hiding anymore or not, but I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today as well. Thank you, Commander Anderson, for kicking us off. I'm a licensed physical therapist. I graduated from University of Southern California last century in 1999, and I've spent my entire career in the public health service. I've spent 25 years serving in 3 different agencies within the federal government, and as has been mentioned, I'm the immediate past Chief Professional Officer of the therapist category in the United States Public Health Service. When I was going to school at USC, we just heard about student debt. It's a private school, and I had a classmate of mine, a classmate in the year ahead of me, before I graduated, when I was in my last year, he said, "Hey, did you know the Indian Health Service has a loan repayment program?" And my ears perked up, and I'm from Arizona. I want to get back to Arizona, and there's a lot of reservations and opportunities to work in Arizona. So that's how I became exposed to the Public Health Service. I started applying before I graduated. It's actually a lengthy application process. You do background checks, medical checks, and the last step on that check was to get licensed, I had to show proof of licensure. And so I graduated from USC, I moved to Arizona, and I started preparing to take the licensure exam. And that was the final step for me to become commissioned in the United States Public Health Service. My application became active, and as soon as I got a job, then I became an active duty officer. And so for 25 years, I've enjoyed a career in the public health service. And we're both obviously officers in the public health service. We're going to talk about therapists in the federal space here, but you're going to get the viewpoint, or we're going to give you a lot of the background for public health. Now, public health service is not well known as a service. It's one of the 8 uniformed services of the United States government. We know the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. You also have NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association. Well, during hurricane season, sometimes you'll see them talking on the news. And the United States Public Health Service is a uniformed service, as well as now the Space Force. So that makes up 8 uniformed services. Our service, United States Public Health Service, actually traces its origin, its roots back to 1798. There was an act for the relief of sick and disabled seamen, and it helped pay for merchant marine, the staffing for providers at merchant marine hospitals. And as you can imagine, there was a significant naval influence in those days. A lot of people were, that was a form of travel. People would stay on ships for a long time, and they'd come into port and need attention. And so that act helped provide for, started the official origins of what now became known as the United States Public Health Service. It continued as a service to develop and progress its practice to include a lot of public health, not just in the ships and regarding to the naval services, but to cover the United States as a whole. And so in 1912, we established the name that we're known by now, the United States Public Health Service, and FDR in 1944 signed the Public Health Act of 1944 into law, and that allowed physical therapists, among other things, a lot of things, it allowed physical therapists to become commissioned in the United States Public Health Service. So in 1945, physical therapists first started to become commissioned in the United States Public Health Service. Oh, this is really sensitive.
And if you're doing the math, that makes us the third oldest service. A lot of people don't realize that.
We're not large. There's only 5,500. We're an all-officer corps. We don't have enlisted, but yeah, we're not terribly well known. We do have 11 categories within the public health service. Almost every healthcare provider that we have has its category in the public health service. You have the medical category, you have therapists, you have pharmacists, you have dentists, nursing. And so almost everybody that you can think of is covered within the United States Public Health Service. And we're led by the United States Surgeon General. Currently, the Vice Admiral Vivek Murthy is our Surgeon General. He's going through his second term. He was also the Surgeon General under the Obama administration. And a Surgeon General can decide can wear a uniform and be a member of the Public Health Service, or they could be a civil servant. And almost every Surgeon General since COOP has chosen to wear the uniform. Each day, Corps officers of all ranks and disciplines continue to carry forward the heritage and values of the United States Public Health Service. As Public Health Service officers, we help to meet the needs of the public health service that the nation has for public health. And we're the largest national public health service in the world. No country has a larger public health service than the United States. And primarily, I would say that we provide services clinically. Most of the public health service officers are clinicians, like nurses, pharmacists, therapists, and 75% of the therapist category in the United States Public Health Service are serving in clinical positions. Though within the public health service, you have the opportunity to serve in maybe some non-traditional roles as well. Agencies across government have different emphasis on public health, and officers can step up and serve in the agencies for administration. You have leadership in public health and in policy development, as well as innovation within agencies and research. And so there's quite a bit of opportunities to serve in the public health realm besides just serving as a clinician. And you might be aware that the Public Health Service will deploy to public health emergencies. With Hurricane Katrina, the hurricane that devastated the Gulf Coast and significantly New Orleans, half of the Public Health Service deployed in waves, in weeks of waves. Within 6 weeks, half the Public Health Service had deployed to areas of need to help provide necessary medical infrastructure and services that were needed after Hurricane Katrina. Ebola was a significant emphasis that Public Health Service got recognition for. COVID, there's a lot of, when New York was declared the epicenter of the U.S. COVID epidemic or initiation, a Navy ship was stationed in New York, and it was staffed in part with Public Health Service officers. The nursing home in Kirtland, Washington, that got hit real early on, we sent a team of Public Health Service officers to respond, and we'll respond to needs along the border if there's a lot of need for, if it's overtaxed at times, the medical systems that help to deal with immigration at the border will deploy at times and as needed, as the United States needs to help respond to public health emergencies. So there's about 800 different locations in all 50 states where you could see PHS officers serving. And these are some of the agencies in which you'll see PHS officers serving. In almost every one of these agencies, you'll have therapists that are serving. The roles of therapist category, okay, I'm going to get to that slide in just a second. The role of therapist category continues to expand as needed. Government needs can change, and as emerging practices are developed, it affects many of the government agencies, and public health service officers will step up to serve in those roles. The foundation built by early visionary therapists has helped to propel the therapist category in the public health service, and today we're a valuable and key element of the United States public health service. All right, let's go to this next slide. I'd like to ask a question, and we could have some interaction here. If you point your phone at the screen, you'll be able to answer this question that I have coming up, and we'll see in real time the answer. I don't know if you still have the ability to log in here on this screen. The question is, how many total physical therapists are there in the federal system? And you have questions A, B, C, and D. So if you get a chance to join and answer, we'll see real time what people are saying. We have, I think, 18 people on, and 52% are saying there's about 400 total physical therapists in the federal system. Maybe I can help you when you're answering the question. Maybe I can give you a little bit more information. So in the federal system, that includes therapists within the Veterans Administration, that includes public health service officers, that includes reservations, other therapists on Indian tribal lands, reservations in the United States, and includes the Department of Defense, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. So the correct answer is 4,000. We have 140 therapists, 140 physical therapists in the United States Public Health Service. There's about 140 therapists that I know of that we've been able to track on Indian reservations. I don't have, there may be more than that. Another 140 that are not PHS officers that are working on Indian reservations. The VA has 3,100 physical therapists serving in the Veterans Administration. They have 670 PTAs, so I didn't include that in the question, but there's 670 PTAs. In the federal space, they're pretty much the only federal system that has PTAs. And then the Department of Defense has about 500 physical therapists that are uniformed and about 180 that are civilian. So that grossly adds up to about 4,000, but don't add it up if you know exactly the number. So good. All right, so that's who we're representing, trying to represent in the presentation today, and I'll turn the time over to Commander Anderson to help explain what makes a therapist a federal therapist.
Thank you. So real quick, how many Corps officers? Anybody remember? It's not a poll. I'm putting you on the spot. How many? That's right. So one of the reasons that we are, you don't know a lot about us or see us is because we don't have an enlisted Corps. So in order to be a public health officer, you must have a certain type of degree, education, that then leads to a certain type of license, certification, which we call qualifying degrees to call you into the service. So obviously that means that you need education. Not that our enlisted folks in our other services don't have education. However, we do not have a vehicle that gets you through your process of getting education to then become an officer. You have to come to us already educated and ready to serve, which makes it very unique. With that being said, when you look at the 8 uniformed services, and typically I usually do a test, who can name all 8 uniformed services? Anybody want to try? Or y'all can help each other out. So you already know the big 5. So, all right, so now we're going to add the Space Force, okay. NOAA, okay. USPHS, and then you have the other 5. So out of all the 8 uniformed services, we are probably per capita the highest educated service because all of our folks are some type of healthcare professional along some lines. With that being the case, we have very, very strict conditions of service for being an officer, which includes PT. Now, I didn't say what I did just yet, because usually that distracts folks, so I'll say it now. So I am a forensic psychotherapist by training. So I come from supermax and maximum security prisons, jails, and law enforcement. I used to be a law enforcement officer. I wore the badge. And I come from, I have been doing this for about 25 years. I know I don't look that old. I work at it. If you've seen me here, I've been in the gym. So just to give you perspective, so I have to have certain competencies, captain has to have certain competencies to be in our service. For me, I came to the service as a mental health provider. And with that being the case, I have to have a license, I have to have a qualifying degree, and then I have to have a license for me to be in the service. And then for all my different emphasis, I have certifications. Same thing for PT. So professional competence is probably, this is not necessarily hierarchical as we go through it, but they're very important. When I'm talking to my new recruits, I tell them, I do our training for our new recruits on disciplinary actions and things like that. And I tell them, you need to think of yourself as the kicker on the football team. We called you to do one job. You got one job to do. So I need you to be the best at that job that we called you to do. So that could be a nurse, that could be PT, that could be mental health, that could be an engineer, that could be a physician, could be a dentist, a veterinarian. Believe it or not, we do have veterinarians, that's healthcare professionals across the services. The largest veterinarian corps is in the Army, but we have several that are in PHS. So professional competence is very important. If our officers are not maintaining these conditions of service, which there are 6, then we have consequences and discipline that is going to ensue. This is where some of it will come back to you all as regulators if we get to that level. The next thing that's important is what's called career growth and advancement. This is generally when I tell our officers that it is inherent that you grow and advance in our service. It is a part of the deal. You are no longer a civilian. So when you see us in uniform, we are uniformed service members. We are not civilians. So there are certain things that we are obligated to do outside and above our profession. And one of that is to advance. That's to make sure that we grow. You see all this nice accoutrement on us, right? That's all about career growth and advancement. And one thing I tell folks is, with that advancement, who wants a pay cut? Anybody go to your boss and say, take less money? Give me less money, I'll take less? And so I tell my officers, no. So we give you a license to go look for more money. We say, hey, we need you to grow. We need you to grow your field. We need you to grow anything that you do that has to do with the profession that we brought you in to be competent in. Then we have deployment readiness. So deployment readiness is interesting because we are the only service that deploys to take care of the United States. Our other services protect the United States. So technically, they can't deploy inside of the state. Anybody inside of the country? Anybody prior service? Know what I'm talking about? What service, sir? Air Force. All right. Yes, thank you. I was stationed with the Air Force for about 5 years. I was a flight commander with the Air Force, ran their behavioral health. I was at Scott Air Force Base, if you're familiar. So with that being the case, our officers deploy inside the United States and then to any of our interests outside the United States. So we'll go to places like Puerto Rico. We'll go to I can never say those islands. Marianas Islands, I can never say it correctly, but to give you perspective. Yep. We will go wherever there's a need to where we take care of those environments. For me, I've deployed all over, and our deployment readiness is a condition of service because at any given time, the president comes in and says, hey, we need you. Then the president goes to the Health and Human Services Secretary, who then goes to the Surgeon General, and then down, or to the ASH, then to the Surgeon General, down to our director who says we need officers to be ready to go. And then we go. We deployed over 60% of the Corps for COVID. So many people got to know us during COVID. You saw, I think there was a couple slides that showed, if you see us, you generally see us like this. This is our field uniform. Oftentimes, we do wear khakis as well. Our uniforms we share with the Navy and the Coast Guard. So deployment readiness is very, very key to what we do. Our PTs, you all deploy as well. So we train our people to deploy to do certain things. You have anomalies like me, who I deploy as a clinician and I deploy operationally because of my background. But many times we're deploying our folks in a clinical role to take care of the people that are needing support. And again, when you think about it, the last deployment that we just sent some folks, it wasn't a huge contingency, but the hurricanes in Florida. Anybody from Florida here? The hurricanes in Florida, the two that hit and hit pretty hard. Hope you all are okay. Your families are okay. Then we have three others that are a little more quiet that you officers don't think a lot about. Security and suitability. So all of our officers must be able to get a security clearance. That's at least a tier 3, or what we call secret. And then you must maintain security clearance and suitability. This is where, and I know to regulators this is important, this is where we tell our folks, how many of you know, not you, this is me talking to my officers, how many of you know that we looked at your finances? And they'll kind of look like, they'll raise their hand a little bit. I say, yeah, we looked at your finances to make sure that you were suitable to be an officer. Anything that has to do with, if you did anything with fraud, if you did anything with even foreclosures on a home, a lot of different things that officers and folks don't think about that impact you with your suitability. And it's a little bit in the background, but we do checks on our officers depending on where you work. Typically it's every 10 years if you have a security clearance, but if you work for places like Homeland Security or the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, or ASPR, you may be looked at a little closer and more often. Then we have health and weight standards. So health and weight standards is where I tell my officers, your body is now part of your service. It's part of your career. Again, that's why I work hard at looking this good, because I have to make sure that I stay able to wear the uniform. I have to stay ready to deploy. We deploy to austere locations. One that sticks out for me is when I deployed to Puerto Rico. Now you may think, wait a minute, Puerto Rico, austere? I go to San Juan, and it's not like that. Well, go to the rest. Anybody from Puerto Rico? Anybody been deep in Puerto Rico? I'm talking deep in. Puerto Rico can be a very hazardous environment. And then I was deployed there for the earthquake response. A lot of us forget about, I shouldn't say forget, but we don't really think about the earthquake that rocked them in 2019 because we went straight into COVID in 2020. But those kinds of locations, we have to be physically fit to be able to respond and go into austere places to make sure that we can support. I always tell my officers, if you're not taking care of yourself, I'm gonna have an attitude with you if I gotta carry you, me, plus the person that I went there to help. All right, we got to be ready to do this job. And so that's the health standards, and then weight standards kind of speak for itself. So those are our conditions of service that will come to play as we talk a little bit more later on in the presentation. It's important to note, though, that if our officers do not keep these conditions of service throughout their entire career, there can be discipline. There can be consequences to those, and obviously we're going to talk more about that. Cap?
Thanks, Commander Anderson. Yeah, there's more to being a physical therapist in the federal space than just graduating from PT school and graduating with your license. And there's a couple, I'll just speak a little bit more about that, just touch on that a little bit more with the other services, the other therapists in federal space there. But for all, no matter where you serve in federal government or in federal space, you can't serve if you don't have a license. So you do have to graduate, you have to get a license from state or the appropriate governing body, the appropriate body to be able to and pass that licensure exam. Then you can work in the VA, and then you can get a commission in the Public Health Service and work as a therapist in the DoD. So that's consistent across the federal agency. We have to have the license, but there's additional requirements there. We mentioned the VA has, the VA is all civilian. The DOD is uniformed and civilian. The DOD will have height and weight standards just like we have. And the background checks that you have to go through, they vary between the agencies, and it depends on the level of security. So where you're working and the kind of access you have depends on the type of background check that you have. And so there's nuances with these conditions of service. Again, you have to have, I mentioned this already, you have to graduate from the appropriate educational association or school and possess a current, active, full, and unrestricted license. Many therapists in the federal space, you'll see, will get a license in a second state because a lot of them will work in a state where they weren't licensed in. So let's go ahead and jump into federal rule or state rule. Sometimes there could be some confusion with state boards, different state boards, not necessarily physical therapy, but with boards that go over, that deal with healthcare. And to kind of introduce this, let's ask another question. So if a federal therapist works within a federal agency that's located, for example, in the state of Arkansas, but they went to school and they were issued a PT license by the state of Kentucky, which practice act do they follow? So you ask yourself, do they follow the Practice Act where they're working, in the state they're working in, or should they follow the Practice Act of the state they were licensed in? So the Practice Act that they have to follow is the state that they're licensed in. So if they're licensed in Kentucky, Kentucky's a state that can restrict their license, can take their license away, suspend their license. But they're working in the federal system, they just happen to be working in Arkansas. So a significant number of federal physical therapists work in a state other than the one they're practicing in. Federal physical therapists often move around. They'll deploy, they'll work in other states when they deploy, but states that federal physical therapists are practicing within cannot require additional qualifications for performance other than those that are deemed sufficient by the federal government. And so if the federal government has taken this therapist from the state of Kentucky, said you can join our service, and they deem them okay to work in Arkansas or Alaska or wherever it may be, Alaska and Arkansas can't say, well, hey, you need to follow our rules. And because they're then telling, in effect, the federal government what to do. And it's interesting, within the federal government, you have, within the BOP, within the Department of Defense, for example, and there's federal agencies that will allow physical therapists through proper credentialing and privileging channels to order limited medications, order labs, order imaging, and that's something that, although it's taught, a lot of that is taught, it's not authorized normally through state practice acts. But there's additional skill sets that therapists in the federal space are able to provide. So let's talk about federal supremacy. In the United States, the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Federal law thus takes precedence over conflicting state law. Again, states may not enforce its licensure requirements against people performing their duties within the scope of their federal employment or federal contract. The Federal Tort Claims Act will cover a therapist that's performing their duties within that federal space for any actions that may be brought to them. Now, if a therapist leaves the federal space and decides to work per diem or as PRN, if they leave their work and do outside work, now the Federal Tort Claims Act does not cover them. They are no longer working in the federal space, and they need a license in that state in order to practice. And that's why many therapists will get multiple licenses in order to be able to perform that work. I probably should have made this slide into 4 different slides. There's a lot of information on here. I hope if you're really interested in it, you at least I'll have it available to you. But the court cases that have reinforced federal supremacy are these are the court cases. In 1920, there's a post office employee who was delivering mail using a post office truck in the state of Maryland, and Maryland said, hey, you need to get our driver's license in order to be able to deliver mail. Well, the court upheld that a state could not require a federal post office employee to procure their state driver's license. The state, therefore, cannot exercise control, interfere with, or interrupt, or interfere with the instrumentalities of the United States. Miller versus Arkansas in 1956 dealt with federal contractors that were working in the state. Arkansas wanted these federal contractors to get a license to work in their state before they started performing federal work, and the state licensing requirement interfered thus with federal government functions and was in conflict with federal procurement laws, so Arkansas was not allowed to enforce that. Sperry versus Florida in 1963, there was a case here where there wasn't federal regulation that covered the federal work that was being performed, but there was state regulation. And so the state said, look, in the absence of federal regulation, we should be able to enforce what our regulations are. And the court case came down that state may not enforce its licensing requirements that would effectively give the state licensing board a virtual power of review over federal determination. And then more recently, appellate courts, such as we see in Taylor versus United States in 1987, support that a state, in this case California, lacks power to require licensing of federal health care providers and physicians, as in this case the United States has, by virtue of its supremacy clause, deemed that the Army hospital that was at issue and its staff are fit to provide health care service in that state. And resultant opinions from the Comptroller General also affirm the principle that federal employees are not required to obtain a state license to conduct federal activities. So this has caused some, there's been confusion, and even recently in Hurricane Rita in Texas, recently in 2005, that the state of Texas, the Department of Health and Human Services sent a lot of employees to Texas to help in the aftermath of Hurricane Rita, and Texas wasn't comfortable with that, and so they went ahead and granted temporary licenses to all the providers that came. I think they were trying to help deal with the situation as they saw or felt like it needed to be completed, so that those healthcare providers could provide services in their state. Now we have the PT licensure compact. This is something I think is it's kind of similar, and it's in allowing therapists to work across state borders. To be eligible, you must hold an active PT or PTA license in your home state and meet other eligibility criteria, such as having no disciplinary action for a couple years. When your eligibility is verified and all fees are paid, you receive the compact privilege and may begin working in other states that are involved or in the compact also. As you can see, there's 32 that currently, as of October, that are actively issuing and accepting compact privileges. There are 7 that have the legislation enacted, but still have some more work to do. And there's 2 where the legislation has been introduced. This is similar to what's being done in the federal space. And there's continuing competency requirements that vary from state to state, so states still have influence over how this is involving them. And I appreciate, as a uniformed service member, that some states will waive the compact fees for current and former military and their spouses. All right, another quick question here. So you have to have a state license. If this Arkansas therapist working in the federal space but has a Kentucky license, if somebody has a complaint against them, where does that complaint go? Where will that complaint go? And admittedly, I don't know how I don't know how well the state boards maybe talk amongst each other. At least for PT Compact, you have to share information. If they've had discipline, you share that with the other states. But if there's a complaint in Arkansas, I don't know that it goes back to Kentucky or how well that information might be shared. But the state where the complaint needs to go is the state of Kentucky, the state that they're licensed in. That's the only state that can enforce or do anything to restrict or with that officer's license. And now there are legal issues that may arise. There are concerns like you could break the law, and there are tribes that brought up charges against therapists in federal space. There are counties, state, federal courts that can bring up charges against a therapist. But as far as practice is concerned, only the state board where officers are licensed will be able to censure or enforce licensing requirements on that therapist. I'll go ahead and turn time back over to Commander Anderson.
So what's interesting about all of this is where you guys come in and the importance of what you do. But there's a lot that goes on before it gets to you, if it even gets to you. And so that kind of goes into our types of discipline. But to reiterate the point about your federal rule versus state, when we deploy, we sometimes, a state will say, well, show us proof that you're licensed. And that's okay, right? Trust but verify. And if they ask that, then we do it. So during COVID, we did have some states that we went in when we were sending strike teams out to actually work in the hospitals and things like that because of the shortages. We had to send our officers with their license from whatever state they're from, so that the credentialing boards of those hospitals said, okay, yeah, you can now come in here and work. So we will, even though, yes, federal rule is the rule, and they must follow it, they can't ask us to verify that this is the case. Because we do have officers who may have come in our service clinical, but then they're not working in a clinical capacity, they're working in a administrative capacity. They still need to keep their license current and keep all their credentials current and make sure that they are meeting that condition of service. Then if we are starting to run up against our conditions of service, we have discipline that happens that may ensue before it gets to you. Sometimes, depending on what a officer does, and this is all officers to include PT, it may not get to you, or if it's egregious enough, it could get to you. Interestingly enough, how it gets to you from us is a little nuanced. Do you all know how you all get your reports? Or is it just typically they show up and you do your job? They show up and you do your job, okay. So in our disciplinary process, and we're talking specifically PHS, but PHS is a large spectrum in the federal space, and so we can kind of talk globally here. And each service, if they have, so let's say the Navy has a PT, they will have their types of discipline as well, but we mirror each other. But for intents and purposes of this discussion, we're talking PHS because we are the largest representation across all the federal agencies as a service in the United States. So when an officer runs up against our conditions of service, we have things called our summary actions and our actions that require a board. Our summary actions are where, okay, you did something, it's very clearly stated in our policy, and now we're going to act against you. So then we can do what's called an LOC, an LOR, and then we can suspend from duty. Suspension from duty is a little interesting. So it doesn't work how a civilian works. When you are in a uniformed service, I'm about to say a double negative, you can never not be paid, okay? So when you are with us, we must constantly pay you, but we can separate you from the government for whatever the good of the government is, investigations, things of that nature. If it's small, we may hit you with an LOC, a letter of counseling. Doesn't go in your file, it stays local to wherever you are, it's not egregious, we need to get your attention. If we can't get your attention with an LOC, then we'll hit you with an LOR, letter of reprimand. In our world, that's bad because now we are impacting folks' ability to advance, we're also impacting their monies. So when you come into our service, for us to be competitive, we then will give extra monies for certain ascension bonuses coming in certain professions. If you carry a certain credential, we will give additional monies. If you start to run up against our conditions of service and start to violate, we will start to pull those back. All right? What better way to get your attention than to hit your pocketbook? If it gets even bigger, if it goes higher than that, and you did something that is violating ethics, that is violating what your license says, if it's violating what the agency says you can do as a clinician, then that's when we start to consider coming to you all. The nuance here is where I sit in our headquarters, we cannot report a license to you. Only where you provide care can the license be reported. So you are in the field and you're working at a Indian Health reservation, Indian Health site. Maybe it's a hospital, you're providing care. If there's a violation there, yes, they report that to us. Yes, we look at discipline and we will discipline inside the service. But if it rises to the level of a violation on the license, then that environment has the obligation to report the license. And you may look at that and say, wait a minute, how does that work? Because you all are the headquarters. Well, we're not there. We're not there. We're not care, custody, and control of that environment. All we have is the report that you all give, not you all, that the agency gives us. So it's kind of nuanced there. Now, if a license is hit, if a license is suspended, or if a license is going to be pulled back, revoked, whatever the language is for whatever your profession is, that is a condition of service. So then we come against the officer, so they may have already received discipline. Then the license gets reviewed. And now if the license is suspended or revoked or taken away in any way, they get hit again because now they're violating a condition of service. So now they can be looked at for termination. If you are not carrying, so this goes back to what I said earlier, if you're not carrying your license, if you are not making sure that you are competent in what you do, now you run the risk of not being an officer. If a license then is revoked or whatever the case may be, or say there's some, let's back up. Let's say an agency comes to us, agency says this officer did X, Y, Z, they did some fraud, they put clients and patients at risk. We feel like their license needs to be disciplined. We will say, well, what discipline did you do? Because there needs to be discipline. If they come to us and say, well, we did discipline, we think their license should be reviewed for whatever, but we think they should still stay an officer. We say, you can't do that. If you feel like this person should not be practicing, then you need to come to us with a petition for a termination. You need to bring a packet to us that says we want to terminate this officer. It takes a lot to terminate an officer. So with that being the case, it's important that you all understand that there's a lot that goes on in the background before it gets to you. And oftentimes our officers in the federal space and civilians too, they, of course, we're not disciplining civilians, but may already have discipline happening to them before it makes it to you. And then whatever else happens can then have further effects down the road. So with that, no, we talk fast. Wanted to take an opportunity for questions. I know we are hidden time here, but wanted to open it up for an opportunity to ask questions and anything that you might be thinking about. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Got to have the mic.
Sir, when that incident occurred in Texas, were those DMAT teams that went in? They were civilians on a DMAT team?
From what I understand, it was it was, I'm sure it included DMAT, but all DHS employees.
For the audience, that's a disaster management assistance team that civilians can volunteer to deploy with FEMA.
That's correct. FEMA is one of the government partners we definitely work closely with.
Second,
Are we supposed to stop so we can't take any more questions now? You carry the power here.
Go ahead, sir. I saw a couple hands.
Who's first? I'll just keep going.
I'm going to go really quick. So Jason Kaiser, Administrator, State of California, largest number of VA hospitals in the system. I've only ever had to do a petition packet for a termination one time in my whole career. Usually, just typically, it's kind of the other way around. You guys tell me that something bad happened, comes to our attention. We make a determination whether discipline should happen on the license level. What I wanted to do for the group, though, was talk about one of the conditions for service and state legislation, oftentimes trying to make accommodations for military members and military spouses, and sometimes mucking it up a little bit, right, by doing things like providing exemptions to continuing competency requirements and those kind of things. And just like a quick, maybe speak on that a little bit of why that creates an issue.
Well, I don't think I have a good answer for that question, but I do know that the VA does have, the Veterans Health Administration, VHA, does have a directive that helps to oversee specifically to, I'm sure for all aspects of healthcare, but specifically for physical therapy services, they have a directive that helps to oversee, and they can, with managing their credentialing and privileging process, they do have oversight over themselves and perhaps try to accommodate for the nuances. And they say if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA, because how it implements the process could be different even among each VA. So that's the best answer I can provide for you.
Mine is just a point of clarification is, so there's no distinction as far as your federal law is concerned between an employee versus contractor of the federal government.
Yes, for us, there is
But the reason why I'm asking in terms of, oftentimes when we have complaints that come to us and someone says, well, I'm a federal employee, and so I'm trying to make the distinction between, okay, are you a federal, like an officer, federal that way, or are you federal by contract?
right.
And when it relates to being able to hold them accountable for what happens in your state versus where they were licensed, how would that work, in terms of contracting versus an officer?
Yeah, I can speak quickly to that. So as far as a contractor, we are not, as PHS, going to discipline a civilian, which would be a GS employee, a government employee, nor will we do any discipline from the PHS side to a contractor. However, that contractor is still held to all of the policies in the federal space. So if they violate a state, violation or whatever, they're still going to be pushed. The big difference, though, is you can fire a contractor fairly quickly if they violate. You cannot fire a federal employee quickly, and then you can't fire us as PHS officers. There's a whole other process.
Thank you, Ben Anderson.
And we'll be here to answer some questions. We got the red stop.
Please fill out the survey, if you can get a survey for the presentation. Thank you.